Welcome to jetNEXUS ALB-X Failover tutorial. Here we have two ALB-X virtual appliances called Failover 1 and Failover 2. We're going to configure Failover 1 as primary or active for our web service and Failover 2 as secondary or passive. Let's start by enabling Failover with a simple tick and update. Back on the IP Services tab, we see a box appear in the primary column. Double-click and tick the primary box, then click Update to apply. Failover 1 is now configured as the primary for virtual IP 192.168.101.15. Let's now configure Failover 2. First, we need to add the virtual IP address and the content server details. Let's name the service type secondary. Don't worry about the warning in red. This is just telling us that we haven't completed the content server details yet. Before we add the content server details, let's enable Failover. And again, this is just a simple tick in the appliance section, just noting the Failover default time is 10 seconds. So the time you see there is in milliseconds. We don't recommend lowering this time below 10 seconds for stability reasons. Now let's add our content server details and hit update to apply, and then watch the status lights change color. Notice the status light is yellow to start with. The secondary will only bring its interface online if it doesn't detect a primary. In this case, the primary is online, so the status light goes blue, and hovering over the light reports it is in Failover standby mode. So Failover 1 is online, Failover 2 is standby. Let's test this with a website. With the browser, if we go to our virtual IP address, we should see content from Web Server 1 as indicated below the jetNEXUS logo. For demonstration purposes, we have configured Web Server 1 on Failover 1 and Web Server 2 on Failover 2. That way we can see which load balancer is active. Let's force Failover now by taking Web Server 1 down. As it's the only content server within the group, this will take the virtual IP down. The secondary will detect this and then wait for its failover timer of 10 seconds to elapse before bringing up the virtual interface and begin serving content. Please note there is no stateful transition of existing connections from Failover 1 to Failover 2. We simply refresh our browser to see that Failover 2 is now active and serving content from Web Server 2. So let's now show you what happens when Web Server 1 is brought back online. Failover 1 detects that Web Server 1 is online and starts its failover timer. Failover 2 detects the primary has arrived and starts its failover timer. Once the failover timer has elapsed, the primary, which is Failover 1, starts serving content from Web Server 1. We can test this by refreshing our browser again. To make better use of both ALB-X's, we can create another virtual IP and reverse which is primary and secondary, and we call this active-active. Let's add another IP address on Failover 1. This time we leave the primary column blank. We will now add the same IP address to failover 2, but this time add a tick in the primary column. Alternating between failover 1 and 2, we can see that failover 1 is active for 192.168.101.15 and failover 2 is active for 192.168.101.16, whilst both boxes are standby for the respective primaries. And we can verify this by browsing to each virtual IP address. And congratulations, you've now learnt how to configure failover for jetNEXUS ALB-X.